Good morning, y'all, and welcome to Need to Know. Today we are talking about elections in the US since that has been a popular topic over the past week. Let's get started. All right, before we get into what happened with President Donald Trump's speech and the legislation that is going through Congress, I did just want to start by highlighting what is true and what is not. The facts we know, because truth can be relative, apparently. So we are going to start by talking about what is true about our election process in the US. And basically, everything I looked at was like every credible research study that has been conducted in the past 20 years on elections in the US found very insignificant amounts of fraud. That's not saying that it doesn't happen with any major system. There is going to be some level of fraud in it, but it's so insignificant, it would never impact the election results. The Brennan Center's Seminole report, sorry, I did not read that before doing this. The Brennan Center's Seminole report on this issue found incident rates of voter fraud between 0.0003% and 0.0025%. Such low rates would never impact election results. I'm in Georgia. You'll know I live in Georgia, and we've had a lot of news surrounding the Fulton County Board of Elections with the FBI raid and taking those documents. But election officials have repeatedly said that there was no evidence of widespread fraud in that election or any of our other elections in Georgia. So there's that. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency called the 2020 elections the most secure elections in American history. States have multiple checks in place to ensure only U.S. citizens are casting ballots. And that's important to know because of what is being proposed right now. So last Thursday, President Donald Trump, he held a news conference to announce the release of some newly declassified documents, and that speech reignited this debate around the election of 2020 and election fraud. And the newly declassified documents did not offer proof that the 2020 elections were rigged or that votes were changed in any way. They also did not invalidate the results of that election. I think that's important to state up front. However, Trump claimed that the documents proved that America's elections are severely at risk of foreign influence and that his own intelligence community withheld information about Chinese influence in the 2020 election. Now, the only document that was highlighted, and this specific information is coming from a Politico article that will be in the description if you would like to go and read that article. It was a good article about what this means and everything. But there was one document that showed intelligence officials debated how to talk about Chinese influence in our elections. And another report showed that China decided not to exert influence in the 2020 election, although it did note that a minority opinion believed some Chinese influence sought to undermine President Trump. Undermine President Trump. What does all that mean? That means that one of the documents that was released showed that some people were having a conversation about how are we going to talk to the president about this. And then another document had the overwhelming majority said China did not exert influence in the 2020 election, but that there were some officials that had a minority opinion that Chinese influence was trying to undermine President Trump. So that is what those documents showed. All that being said, none of this is evidence that proves that our election systems are at severe risk of influence, foreign influence. Of course, there are always bad actors. And I mean, if you're in the national security space, you know that like to undermine our elections is the number one way that our adversaries can undermine our democracy. Once people start losing faith in our election systems, that it is the foundation of our democracy, right? It's our elections and knowing that they are free and secure elections. So, of course, there are going to be bad actors, people who, or governments, institutions, groups that are against the US and that are trying to undermine those elections. What is disconcerting, to say the least, is when we undermine our own elections. So keep that in mind. So the speech with Trump, basically he is posing those documents as evidence as to why we need the Save America Act. The Save America Act is kind of a passion project for President Trump, and he's been trying to get it sent through Congress for a while now, and has even held up other legislation or tried to hold up other legislation to get them to send it through, but it hasn't been sent through yet. And I tried to look on both sides of the argument of this legislation because I wanted to understand the side that's for it. Why are they for it? Side that's against it. Why are they against it? So I'm going to try to go through all of that. And I picked two explainer pieces from two different groups. One I feel is against it. One I feel is for it. And I'll tell you what they said. So the one that's for it, for the Save America Act, is the James Madison Institute. They had an article about why it was important. And basically in the article, they explained that the Save America Act is moving the responsibility to prove citizenship from election officials to individuals. So it will now be each of our, sorry if you heard my oven, I'm about to cook something. So now how it works is that states have several checks in place to make sure that people who are registered to vote are citizens of the United States and are eligible to vote, right? And so the burden is on the election officials to make sure that is what's happening. If this act passes, then the burden will be placed on the individual. And acceptable documentation includes like a U.S. passport or birth certificate. The James Madison Institute also mentioned Real ID as a method that could be used for this. However, the Center for American Progress, which is the other that is against this, or I would say is against this, they said that Real ID would not meet the satisfaction of the legislation, and I wasn't able to verify whether or not that would work for it, but that's what was said on both of those. So I'm not really sure about that, but you would need some type of acceptable documentation to be like, yes, I am a citizen of the United States and I have a right to vote. And the James Madison Institute in that article was arguing that this is important to ensure the integrity of our election systems because that is the basis of our democracy, and that this act would help increase that integrity, increase that assurance to Americans that our election systems are secure. That is their argument. However, I will say one thing I was disappointed with this article was that it did not have a lot of facts or statistics to like back up its claims. The Center for American Progress, their article has a lot of facts and statistics. So we're going to try to go through some of those. But I do think that the Center for American Progress is against this legislation based on the statistics that they show. So they argue that to prove citizenship when you register, it would decrease the amount of people who are registered to vote. And their argument is based on the fact that 146 million Americans do not possess a valid passport, which is one of the ways people can show that they're a citizen. And to put that in context, about 153 million Americans voted in the 2024 presidential election. So more people voted in the presidential election than have passports. If you have registered to vote, at least in Georgia, I know every state is different. Here, it is very easy to register to vote. I recently updated my voter registration. Well, recently, it was like 2 years ago at this point. It feels recent. But I recently updated it because we moved. And it was so easy because whenever I went to the library to get a library card, they were like, do you want to update your voter registration? I was like, sure. Whenever I updated my license, I was able to update it then too. And so forcing this proof of citizenship at that stage would limit our ability to update our voter registration online or register to vote online or it would just limit the ability to register to vote. And some other facts that they pointed out was that passport ownership is mainly in blue states. And they had a great infographic on that. I'm going to link to all the articles I used to write the script, but they had a great infographic that shows that majority of passport owners are in blue states. And they also noted that 84% of women who marry change their surname. The reason this is important is because if birth certificates are a way to show that you are a citizenship, that means 84% of women who are married cannot take their birth certificate as a proof of their citizenship because their name doesn't match. And the law doesn't clarify or give any type of like other documentation that married women could use to prove their citizenship other than passport. So that's potentially not good for married women. They might not be able, it might make it very complicated for married women to register to vote. And 69 million American women do not have a birth certificate with their legal name on it. So that's something to keep in mind. This will also severely impact working class and lower income Americans who a majority do not have valid passports. It'll also majorly impact young people who might not have a passport and Republicans because they are less likely to have passports than Democrats. So that's kind of what's going on with the Save America Act. And I hope I laid those facts out in a way that you are able to produce your own opinion. If you think that our elections do need more security, then you might be for the Save American Act, or you might not. You might think there's another way that we could increase the security of our election systems. I do want to reiterate, I think the main argument behind the Save America Act is to ensure that non-Americans are not voting. Non-citizens are not voting in our elections. And there is very little evidence that non-citizens are voting in our election. Like I said before, states have multiple checks to ensure that the people who are registered to vote are citizens of this country. it's also interesting if you think about the people who are non-citizens in our country. If they're undocumented, it's highly unlikely that they would go to a place where they would have to have voter registration and other forms of documentation to vote. So, yeah, it's just highly unlikely that that's an actual problem that we need to be concerned about. That's not to say that larger actors like other governments and adversaries are not trying to influence our elections. However, because our election system is very secure, it makes more sense to influence the people who are voting, the citizens of our country, to vote the way they want them to, rather than to try to change votes on the back end. Our election system is also very complicated because every state does it differently, right? So, and that also makes it more secure. So it would make more sense if an adversary wanted to influence our elections, they would do it with other methods like propaganda and social media and stuff like that. So be vigilant and be aware of all the forms of media these days that can influence your opinion. Be critical of what I say. Definitely go and do your own research. I've provided links to where I got stuff. If you find other things that support a different view, please send them my way. Put them in the comments. I would love to read them. So yeah, we can all be more informed people together. The main thing that you can do if you want to do something about this is call your congressman. It is call your congresswomen, call your representatives, call your senators, get them on the phone, send them letters, communicate with them however you can communicate with them, obviously respectfully and not like being crazy, but definitely share your opinion with them, whether you want them to pass this or not, because they're debating it, and we'll see what happens. All right, so I kind of wanted to change up how I ended this, and I wanted to just give some like highlights of what people will most likely be talking about this week to kind of prepare you for your week before you go into work today or whatever. So what will people be talking about this week? This week, most likely, people will be talking about the war in Iran and about how that's developing with the US and Iran, and whether or not there's going to be another ceasefire, or if it's going to continue, and if it's going to increase or intensify. So that will be on people's minds this week. It's also a big week for major big tech companies. They will be reporting results of their earnings this week, such as Tesla, Intel, and Alphabet, the company that owns Google and YouTube. So they're going to be doing that this week, which also has some relation to the war in Iran with the economy and how all that's shaping out. So all of these conversations are going to be kind of together. And another thing that is happening is you might have seen some rallies happening about the midterm elections. We've recently just had some here in Georgia. And so you're going to be seeing more campaign events pop up, and those candidates are going to start trying to engage their constituents. So you'll see more of that. And it's also happening as protests are expected this week involving immigration, voting rights, and data centers. So you might see some stuff about that this week as well. So just be aware. Those are things that might come up this week that you might want to pay attention to. If it's too exhausting for you, though, like hopefully this was enough to keep you informed and help you make good decisions in your life. All right, that's it for today on Need to Know. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. If you liked receiving your news this way, please like, share, and subscribe. I am also on Instagram if you want some behind the scenes action and whatever I'm doing, trying to prepare for the next episode. And if you would like to support this work directly, you can subscribe to my Substack. That is the way that I'm trying to keep this content free, is so that I can still afford to eat, but also be able to keep the content free. So you can subscribe on there if you want to support my work. But as you start your week, please remember that you are alive, you are whole, and you are here. Thanks for watching. See you next time.